let's talk a little bit about what it doesn't do well, because there's a lot of important things that quantitative data, metrics, analytics, A/B testing, all this stuff, it just doesn't do, and a lot of teams are sometimes trying to use it for these reasons. Data does not replace design. I mean, I say this as a UX designer who is in love with metrics. This whole idea that we can just throw things out into the world and A/B test our way to a great product is just one of the worst aspects, I think, of the rise of this worship of data. Metrics don't replace designers. Quantitative data also doesn't replace listening to users. I mean, it gives us another channel for getting feedback from users, but the information that it gives us isn't the same as what we're getting from connecting with actual human beings who are using our actual product. It also doesn't tell us what we should be building. It only gives us information about what we have built. And yes, knowing information about what we've built is an incredibly useful tool, but it's not so good that we should simply throw away all of our other tools, right? Just because I have a hammer doesn't mean that I don't need a table saw. So we'll talk about this a little bit later. It can do a few things, right? Data can help inform our design decisions. It doesn't replace designer product decisions, but it gives us important feedback on the product decisions that we've made. Metrics help us to understand whether our decisions helped or hurt user behavior. They can tell us whether we're going in the right direction. And it can also help us inform our research and tell us what we should be looking into. I'm going to get into details about this in a minute. But that's enough high-level discussion. So let's go ahead and get into the examples. I want you to imagine a funnel. All right, picture it in your mind or up on the screen. It's not just any funnel, right? This is a checkout funnel. We're going to use a checkout funnel as our example. And I want you to imagine that this funnel is part of your product. Let's say that you have, I don't know, a software as a service business or an e-commerce site that allows people to sign up, pay you for something. Wouldn't that be nice? What the product is doesn't actually matter, since we're just going to look at the part of the product that can actually, where they can decide to give you money. And for this particular product, there are a few steps that people have to go through in order to give you money. Now, I'm not saying these are the right steps or that they're in the right order. You could probably argue that there are way too many of them, but it's an example. Now, this is one of the reasons why I don't like to call these funnels. As you can see, so the implication of a funnel is, right, that everything that you pour into the top comes out the bottom, right? That's how funnels work. But that's not how these sorts of funnels work. This is more like a sieve. And you can see that at each step of the funnel, we're losing a certain percentage of the people who started, right? We're pouring, a bunch of people into the top. We're acquiring them. They're, saying, I want to buy this thing. And then at each step, people are dropping out. It's more sieve-like. Here it is translated into numbers, and I am asking you politely not to go back and check my math. It's probably right, but it might not be. What this is showing us is that for every 100 people that you dump into the top of the funnel, only 18 people are successfully getting to the bottom. In other words, you're acquiring 100 people through some means, probably buying them with Google Ads or getting customer referrals or any number of really fairly expensive channels, but you're only getting money from 18 of them. That's what's happening, and that is not good. Now, if we look back at the funnel, we can see that some of the steps look less good than others, like specifically that payment info screen or step looks pretty poor. We're losing 36 out of every 100 people right there, and so that's what I call a friction point, right? That's an obvious friction point. People are getting to the payment info, and for some reason they're sticking. So I'm going to ask you if anybody has any guesses why people are sticking to the payment info. Because I bet you could come up with some ideas. Like just based on this number, I will bet that a lot of you already have ideas about what is wrong and how to fix it. And I know this because I've shown this graph to people in companies before, only using their actual metrics from their actual checkout funnels, and they've immediately started to brainstorm ways to fix it. Like, oh my God, we're losing 36 buyers at this payment info screen. Maybe we need to add new payment methods, right? Or maybe it's really confusing, or maybe the users don't feel secure and we should put a big lock on the page, or maybe we should try doing all of those things and then just see if the problem gets fixed. I want you to cut it out. Right? When you're doing this, when you look at the data and then immediately go to solution space, you're effectively trying to use quantitative information for something that it does not do. You're trying to use it to explain rather than to describe. See, if you really want to understand that friction point, you need to do two things. You need to describe it, right? You need to say, this is what is happening in the world. That's where the metrics and analytics were useful. Then you need to explain why it's happening. And that's where qualitative research comes in. Because you can all say it with me, because I've been saying this, it turns out, since 2009. Quantitative data tell you what is happening. Qualitative data tells you why it's happening. So if quant tells you what and qual tells you why, how does that work in the real world? How would you use them together to actually build something? So let's look at an example. For this example, we're going to assume that you already have some sort of product that's out in the world and that you have some users using it, since that makes it much easier to actually, collect quantitative data. The first step in the process is to identify where your biggest problem is. I mean, there's no reason to spend a lot of time working on things that don't need much improvement. You want to concentrate on the things that matter most. As we saw earlier, one of the ways to identify big problems is to use your funnel metrics. They're not the only kind of metrics that you can use here, but they're outstanding for understanding where people are falling out of any particular funnel in your product. Now, you might remember from our funnel before, which was like 5 seconds ago, so if you don't remember it, then that might be a problem. The payment info step of our funnel was a particularly big problem, right? We're losing a lot of people there. And that, of course, is quantitative data. We're using quant to help us identify our biggest problem. But we still don't know why it's a problem, right? So that's step 2, understand why. For this particular process, in this particular instance, I would use a technique like observational usability testing in order to understand the why. Now, observational usability is one of many, many forms of qualitative research. It's very useful and very easy. And I like to describe it as watching people use your damn product in order to understand all the pain that you are inflicting on them. And it involves doing that, watching people use your damn product in order to understand all the pain that you are inflicting on them. So in the case of our funnel flow, you'd want to, get people, preferably people who are actual users of your product or people who might be users of your product, to go through the purchase flow in front of you, speaking out loud, in order to see where they get stuck. You'd want to pay particular attention to that payment info step in order to see why they were getting stuck there. Now, based on your observation of between 4 and 6 people, because that's the correct number of people for this particular sort of small qualitative study, you might come up with these sorts of observations. Maybe some of the people didn't have the payment information handy, others were confused by a particular question, maybe all of them saw a box for a promo code and sort of wandered off to look for a discount. Now, again, these are things that I have actually observed. These are ways that I have observed people get stuck on payment flows lots of times before, but I don't know why people are getting stuck on your payment flow, which is why we do the observational testing, and let's say that these are the things that we found, right? Once we found these in observational testing, I like to actually show the problems I've observed right on a funnel like this, so that I can sort of visualize each person falling out of the funnel, right? At each step, I can say, we lost 36 people here, and these were the things that I saw in observational usability testing, which must explain why that happened. So, of course, now that you've observed some possible use problems, you need to figure out if fixing those problems for users is actually going to solve the business problem that you have, which is that you're losing a huge percentage of people on this step. It could be that each of these problems is negatively affecting the funnel equally, or maybe just one is causing a big drop-off, or maybe it's something else entirely that you weren't able to observe. Whatever it is, the way to figure this out is by coming up with some possible solutions for the problems and seeing if they improve your funnel. Now, my first step in making a product change is to create several solution hypotheses, and the reason that I do this is because I need to test to see if the change was successful. And in order to test to see if a proposed change is successful, I have to know what both success and failure look like. If there's more than one way to solve a user problem, and there generally is, I like to list the possible negative consequences of the change as well as the positive ones. So let's take, for example, one of the problems that we observed in our hypothetical research. People looked for a promo code and then left the checkout funnel. Again, not saying without a doubt this is the most important problem, but it's one that we observed, and it's one for which we can pretty quickly come up with some possible solutions. Now, the easiest solution, of course, is just screw it, remove the promo code box entirely, right? If it's confusing people, if people are seeing it and fleeing, just get rid of it. Sounds totally reasonable. So our hypothesis is, if we remove the promo code from the checkout flow, we'll see an increase in conversion. Great. Now, what often happens here is that people say something like, oh, right, I read a blog post that this happened, so clearly that's the right answer, and then they change it and ship it and never look at it again. Problem solved. Except there was a reason that promo code box was there in the first place, probably. Just put things into our interface for no good reason for decent designers. So we should ask ourselves, what might go wrong with our change? We owe it to ourselves and our users to understand the full impact of anything we do and to predict it. For example, it might be that offering promo codes to people increases acquisition. Offering somebody a 20% coupon might incentivize them to come and look at our product. Or offering the product for 20% less might be just what's needed to convert extremely price-sensitive people. So if we're going to get rid of that promo code box, we need to keep an eye on the top of the funnel to make sure we're not hurting acquisition, and at the bottom to make sure we're not ruining conversion farther down. Remember, nothing that I'm predicting here is necessarily true. These are just assumptions that I'm making that we need to test, which brings us to step 4. And this is probably the most important step. Without learning and iterating, we're just, flinging products out into the void and then going on our merry way, assuming that we've made improvements, when really we could be spending time on things that don't improve our metrics or, even make things worse. I've certainly seen that happen. Now, for this step, we're going to use a combination of both quantitative and qualitative methodologies. In order to learn, we need to come up with a test for our solution hypothesis. How would we figure out if the thing that we're doing to solve the problem we observed is correct? How do we know we're right? Well, we need to do some sort of quantitative testing of the design without the promo code in order to see if conversion improves without sacrificing any other metric, right? Ideally, we do this in an A/B test, since that's the best way to determine whether there's actually a difference between the new design and the control. See, an A/B test cancels out all that external noise. For example, let's say you suddenly got an influx of people from a totally different channel, from someplace that's very price sensitive. That could affect your conversion rates. But if you're A/B testing, you don't need to worry about that. That's all factored out. Again, totally quantitative way of finding out if user behavior was affected by the changes that we made. Now, let's say that our A/B testing came out well and we saw an improvement in conversion, and not too much of a decrease in acquisition. That's great. It means our changes improved things overall. Yay, right? Good for us. But it's not enough just to know that we're right, sadly. We also should learn why we were right. And we can do this, again, by performing some simple qualitative research. Do more observational usability testing, or use another great research methodology, and contact the folks who are still getting stuck at the step to see why they're still getting stuck. Make sure not just that the changes that you made were improvements, but they were improvements for the reasons that you predicted and not just some anomalous fluke. Or, if we weren't right, or let's say we weren't right enough and we wanted to see if we could improve things even more, let's say that instead of losing 36 people at that step, now we're losing 32 people at that step. Still too many people. We might go on to implement another one of our solutions to a problem that we saw in testing. Or we might try addressing a totally different problem next time. It's not the promo code. We're gonna try addressing one of the other problems that we saw and see if that fixes it. Whatever it is, we keep iterating until we're consistently happy with the numbers that we're seeing in the funnel. We have to decide, losing 36 people at this step is not good enough. We need to keep trying to fix that step until we're only losing 15 people or 10 people, or probably not no people, because that would be unlikely. But we need to figure out what success looks like there. And when we're done, or we're done enough and that big problem isn't as big of a problem any longer, we can go back through the steps, identify a new problem by looking at our quantitative data. Now, is that process the only way to do things? God, no, right? There are lots of other ways to combine qualitative and quantitative data. For example, you can start with qualitative research and identify user needs through customer interviews. Or you can spot weird patterns in very large sets of data. Or you can start with a usability test, right? The combinations are endless. Just remember, when you go back and you decide to start combining them yourself, you use quantitative data to tell you what is happening, and you use qualitative data to tell you why it's happening. So, if you're wondering, should I be talking to users or should I be measuring their behavior, ask yourself, do I want to know what or why? The answer is going to be both, in which case you have to figure out how you're going to combine those two types of research. And if you do that, I promise you, you will build better products. So I'm going to take questions now. This is just a little short example. if I don't get to your question, you can feel free to email it to me. I answer all the emails that I receive, eventually, sometimes quickly, depending on what I'm procrastinating. And I will tell you that a lot of different kinds of qualitative and quantitative testing tactics are in my first book, which is UX for Lean Startups, which is from O'Reilly. That is available now. And sort of this overall structure is available in my new book, which is coming out in September. I finally have a release date in September. It's called Build Better Products, and I hope you all check it out.